Next, we move on to specification number 6, which asks us to discuss the possible effects of self-pollination and cross-pollination on a population, especially in terms of genetic variation, the ability to respond to environmental changes, and dependence on pollinators. So now we will discuss how these two types of pollination can affect plant populations. The effects of self-pollination and cross-pollination on a population can be understood in several ways. First, in terms of genetic variation, cross-pollination increases variation because pollen comes from a different plant of the same species. In contrast, self-pollination reduces variation since both gametes come from the same plant, producing offspring that are genetically very similar. Second, when it comes to responding to environmental changes, populations produced through cross-pollination have a better chance of survival. The greater genetic variation means that some individuals may be able to survive diseases, climate changes, or changes in habitat. Populations that mainly self-pollinate have less variation, so they may find it harder to adapt to new conditions. Third, for long-term survival, cross-pollination supports evolution and natural selection because new genetic combinations are created over generations. Self-pollination, however, may limit the ability of a population to evolve over time because there is little genetic diversity. Another difference is dependence on pollinators. Cross-pollination often depends on pollinators such as insects or wind to transfer pollen between plants. If pollinator numbers decrease, reproduction may also decline. Self-pollination does not rely on pollinators, so it can still occur even when pollinators are absent. Finally, self-pollination provides reproductive assurance because it guarantees seed production even when plants grow in isolation or when pollinators are scarce. However, this advantage comes with the disadvantage of reduced genetic diversity in the population. So, now, we can conclude that flowering plants mainly use two methods of pollination, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Both processes involve moving pollen from the anther, which is the male part of the flower, to the stigma, the female part. Self-pollination happens when pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower or to another flower on the same plant. The key feature of self-pollination is that it does not require a different plant for reproduction, and the result is offspring that are genetically very similar to the parent plant. Cross-pollination, on the other hand, occurs when pollen from the anther of one plant reaches the stigma of a flower on a different plant of the same species. This process often relies on external pollinators like wind, water, or animals such as bees, butterflies, and birds. The result of cross-pollination is increased genetic diversity, which helps plant populations adapt to changing environments and resist diseases. In summary, self-pollination involves pollen transfer within the same flower or plant, produces low genetic diversity, and does not depend on pollinators, with examples including peas, tomatoes, and wheat. Cross-pollination transfers pollen between different plants, generates high genetic diversity, requires agents like wind or insects, and is seen in plants like apples, pumpkins, and grasses.